Britain built itself on coal. The railways, the factories, the warships, the homes. All of it fed by what men brought up from the darkness below. We remember the brass bands and the miners' welfare halls. We remember the glow of coal fires and the communities built on what came up from the earth. Generations of families. The fuel that powered an empire. But some shafts became tombs. Some men who descended in the morning never saw daylight again. And some of those men are still down there. I have gone through government reports and local archives to bring you 15 mines where workers went down and never came back up. Underground, they worked in passages so narrow they could not stand upright. They breathed air thick with coal dust. Every shift was a gamble. Every return to the surface was a small victory. Let us begin with the children. On the 4th of July 1838, a humid summer day broke over Silkstone in Yorkshire. More than 300 feet underground at Huskar Pit, around 50 children and 33 coal-getters were cutting and moving coal. They were eager to make up time and money following 4 unpaid days off for Queen Victoria's coronation celebration. Then the weather turned. Heavy rainfall struck the area and disabled the winding engine on the vertical shaft. The workers stranded at the pit bottom were instructed to remain there until they could be brought up to the surface. But a number of children decided to try and escape through the day-hole to Nab's Wood. A nearby stream had burst its banks in the rain. A torrent of water entered the shaft. 26 children drowned. The youngest was 7 years old. The funerals were held 3 days later, attended by thousands. The children were placed in 7 graves. 11 girls were buried together in 3. 15 boys in the other 4. A memorial was erected in the churchyard in 1841. It still stands. The disaster shocked public opinion so completely that it led directly to the 1842 Mines Act. The law finally prohibited girls and boys under the age of 10 from working underground. That protection came too late for the children of Huskar. Moving forward to December 1866, the Oaks Colliery at Hoyle Mill near Barnsley became the site of Britain's worst mining disaster until the 20th century. A series of explosions caused by fire damp ripped through the underground workings. 340 people were down the mine when the first explosion struck, and only 6 survived. The next day, 23 volunteers descended to rescue any survivors. A second explosion killed them all. The total death toll reached 360. Some families lost not only the breadwinner, but 3 or 4 sons. Nearly all the men in Hoyle Mill perished. Only 75 bodies were recovered before the shafts were sealed. More were found over the following years. Some were never recovered at all. Queen Victoria subscribed £200 to the relief fund, and the Lord Mayor of London opened another fund. But no amount of money could replace what those families lost. A memorial now stands by St Mary's Church in Barnsley. It was unveiled in 2016, 150 years after the disaster. Scotland's worst ever mining accident occurred on the 22nd of October 1877 at William Dixon's Blantyre Colliery in Lanarkshire. An explosion killed 207 miners, possibly more. The youngest was 11. It was known that fire damp was present in the pit. It is likely that this was ignited by a naked flame. The accident left 92 widows and 250 fatherless children. But perhaps the saddest outcome came 6 months later. Dixon Limited called 34 widows to their offices. These women were still residing in the miners' houses that had been rented to their husbands as a condition of employment. They had stayed because they had nowhere else to go. At this meeting, they were served with eviction notices. 2 weeks later, they were thrown out. The mine owner erected a 5.5-metre tall granite monument. The engraved dedication reads that it commemorates 240 workmen killed in explosions in 1877 and 1879. Many of them are buried there. The Hartley Colliery disaster in Northumberland on the 16th of January 1862 killed 204 men and children. But they did not die from an explosion or a flood. They died because they were trapped. The beam of the pit's pumping engine broke and fell down the shaft. With a single shaft colliery, there was no other way out. Men and materials passed up and down on one side, the pumps worked on the other. When the beam fell, it blocked everything. The men were simply trapped in the darkness. They knew help was trying to reach them, waiting. A list was published afterwards of the workmen left alive who had been employed at Hartley Colliery. There were only 55. The pit never reopened. The disaster led to legislation requiring all collieries to have 2 means of escape, a law that came too late for the 204 men and boys at Hartley. The women of these mining villages carried a burden that history often overlooks. They woke before dawn to prepare food for their husbands. They heated water for tin baths when the men returned black with coal dust. They scrubbed clothes that never truly came clean. And when disaster struck, they gathered at the pit head in their aprons and shawls, waiting for news, watching the winding gear, counting the men who emerged. When the worst was confirmed, they had no time for prolonged grief. There were younger children to feed, rent to be paid. Without a husband's wages, destitution came quickly. Some took in lodgers, some went to the workhouse, some married again within months, not for love, but for survival. The choice was stark: find another provider, or watch your children starve. South Wales was the engine room of the empire. It was also a slaughterhouse. Between 1880 and 1900, South Wales accounted for 18% of Britain's miners, but 48% of all UK mining deaths occurred in the region. The Universal Colliery in Senghenydd, near Caerphilly, became the site of the worst mining disaster in United Kingdom history on the 14th of October 1913. An explosion killed 439 coal miners and 1 rescuer. The same colliery had exploded 12 years before, killing 81. Nothing had changed enough to prevent it happening again. Some of the bodies had been so badly mutilated in the explosion that they could only be identified by certain items of clothing. One man was recognized by his new boots, worn for the first time that day. Another, a young boy, by the patch his mother had sewn onto his jacket only a few days before. It was estimated that over 1,000 people in the area were bereaved. A memorial garden in Senghenydd was formally acknowledged by the Welsh government as the National Mining Disaster Memorial Garden of Wales. It was officially opened on the 100th anniversary of the disaster. 4 days before Christmas in 1910, the Pretoria Pit at West Horton in Lancashire suffered a catastrophic explosion. 889 miners arrived for work that morning. At 7:50 in the morning, a huge explosion swept through the yard mine. 344 men and boys lost their lives. Some were as young as 13. West Horton was particularly hard hit. More than 200 men and boys from the town died in the blast. Some families were almost completely destroyed. One woman, Mrs. Tildersley of Chorley Road, lost not just her husband. The explosion also claimed the lives of 4 of her sons. By the end of that day, everyone knew that over 300 lives had been lost. Some would wait throughout the night to watch bodies being brought to the surface. This process would take weeks. Some bodies were only recovered as late as February 1911. A statue opposite West Horton Church was unveiled in December 2010, almost 100 years after the disaster. The Gresford Colliery in Wrexham, North Wales, exploded on the morning of the 22nd of September 1934. 254 men and boys died. Only 11 bodies were ever recovered. The remaining 243 are still down there. One mother, Emily Capper, wrote to officials about the terrible waiting her family was going through. Her daughter Margaret wrote that her mother, who had been in failing health for some time, was feeling the strain. She asked if an attempt could be hastened to try and get those bodies to their proper resting place. By doing this, she wrote, "You will give the only consolation there is to be given to those who are left behind suffering." Emily Capper never recovered her son's body. The mine became a tomb that was never opened. The Gresford disaster hymn is still sung in Welsh mining communities. Oaks Colliery in Whitehaven, Cumberland, suffered not one but 3 explosions in 9 years. In 1922, 39 men were killed. In 1928, 13 men were killed. In 1931, 27 men were killed. 79 men in total from the same colliery. The day before the 1922 explosion, gas had been reported in the 6 quarters seam of the mine. The deputy in charge descended to assess the situation with a shot firer. He approved the shot firer to go ahead anyway. One man had to be identified by his belt and trousers because his face was so disfigured. Dyglake Colliery in Staffordshire. Flooded on the 14th of January, 1895. 77 miners died. Only 3 bodies were ever recovered. The report describes what happened. Between 11 and 11:30 in the morning, the normal water in the waterways was suddenly observed to rise and to assume a deep black colour. Almost immediately afterwards, an immense volume of water rushed along the main dip and other passages of the mine, carrying all before it. The water turned black before it came. Then it took them. The rest of the men are still down there, more than 130 years later. The pit never reopened. The site is now farmland. The Victorians could claim ignorance. By the 20th century, we knew the risks. Men died anyway. On the 7th of September 1950, liquid peat and moss flooded pit workings at Knockshinnott Castle Colliery in Ayrshire, Scotland. 129 miners were trapped underground. Rescue teams worked non-stop for 3 days. 87 sets of oxygen rebreathers were used to lead 116 men out through old, disused, gas-filled mine workings. 13 men trapped close to number 5 heading could not be reached. Their bodies were recovered months later. One of the rescue team leaders was a man whose younger brother was among the 13. He organised the evacuation, knowing his brother was among the dead. On the 29th of May, 1951, an explosion at Easington Colliery in County Durham killed 83 mine workers. It was the worst British mining disaster in the later 20th century. An accumulation of flammable gas was ignited by sparks from cutter picks striking pyrites. Blunt picks. Sparks. That was enough. The youngest victim was 18 years old. The oldest was 68. The average age of the pitmen killed was 43. The memorial walkway has 83 trees, 1 for each man. Each tree was planted by the youngest miner at the colliery, a boy of 16. On Wednesday, the 21st of March, 1973, 7 mine workers died at Loft House Colliery in Yorkshire when workings flooded. The disaster occurred when a new coal face was excavated too close to an abandoned, flooded 19th century mine shaft. 3 million gallons of water rushed in and trapped 7 men 750 feet below ground. A 6-day rescue operation succeeded in recovering only 1 body, Charles Cotton. A father, Sid Hay, worked in the rescue for 6 days, trying to reach his son Alan. On the 6th day, he stood up at a meeting in the local cinema and said he did not want any more men risking their lives to try to recover his son's body. In his heart, he knew his son was dead. Alan Hay was 30 years old, the youngest of the 7. 6 of the 7 bodies were never recovered. A 7-sided stone obelisk listing their names was erected above the point where they remained trapped. On New Year's Day, 1942, an explosion struck Senghenydd Colliery in Staffordshire. 57 men and boys died. Miners were an extremely superstitious group, and one such belief held that it was unlucky to mine coal on New Year's Day. Consequently, miners very rarely worked on that day. However, with the Second World War in progress, it was imperative to extract as much coal as possible. The men worked that day. It proved to be a fateful decision. On the 12th of January 1918, the mini pit at Torkoth Hill in Staffordshire suffered an explosion that killed 155 miners. The war was still on. Coal was needed. The rescue report describes what followed. It took 5 days and nights to bring out the dead. For 5 days and 4 nights, without rest or sleep, the rescue teams led exploring bands, fighting death inch by inch, carrying out the poor fellows as best they could. The pit reopened. Production resumed. Today, if you walk through these former mining villages, you will find the memorials. Stone crosses in churchyards, bronze statues in town squares, garden walls inscribed with names. In Senghenydd, 439 names. In Barnsley, 360. In Westhoughton, 344. The numbers are so large they become abstract, but each name was a man who ate breakfast that morning, who had a favourite chair by the fire, who knew the sound of his children's laughter. Some villages never recovered. The young men who survived moved away to find work elsewhere. The old men who remained grew older. The chapels emptied. The welfare halls closed. The winding gear was dismantled and sold for scrap. Pit heaps were grassed over and turned into country parks. Nature reclaimed what industry had scarred. But the bodies remain. At Gresford, 243 men lie beneath a site that is now a golf course and country park. At Diglake, 74 men rest under fields where cattle graze. At Loft House, 6 men wait in flooded tunnels that will never be pumped dry. Their families could not bury them properly, could not stand at a graveside and say goodbye. The earth that took them refused to give them back. And this is the weight of it. The 15 mines in this video represent a fraction of the death toll. There are over 164,000 records in the database of UK coal mining accidents and deaths. Between 1873 and 1953, 85,000 people were killed in mining accidents in Britain. It was the disasters which took hundreds of lives that caught the fancy of newspapers. But the truth was that death could call at any time. Most of the victims died in ones or twos. A roof fall here, a gas pocket there. Little by little, the numbers added up to enormous totals. By 1870, over 1,000 lives were still being lost in mining accidents each year. The last deep coal mine in Britain closed in December 2015. Kellingley Colliery in Yorkshire. The men who worked there were the last of their kind. An unbroken line stretching back centuries. Father to son to grandson. When the final shift ended, something ancient ended with it. The knowledge of how to read the coal seam, how to listen for danger, how to survive in a world without sunlight. The coal seams are exhausted now. The pits are closed. But in Gresford and Diglake and Loft House, the men are still down there, waiting.